Welcome to Viewpoint on ILTV, where we bring you leading voices from the Middle East and beyond. In this special, we're taking you inside the Israel-Gaza war and global anti-Semitism to hear from thought leaders, cultural critics, shaping today's discourse. I'm Emily Schrader, and today we're speaking with Brianna Wu. Brianna is an American software engineer, a journalist, and a political activist known for her fearless advocacy on tech ethics, gender equality, and national security issues. A prominent voice on the progressive left, Wu has become an outspoken critic of the movement's radicalization, particularly in relation to national security threats and the rise of anti-Semitic rhetoric masquerading as social justice. Brianna is also a former congressional candidate and the co-founder of the game development studio Giant Space Cat. Wu is now visiting Israel for the first time, where she's been engaging with local communities as well as survivors of the October 7th attacks. Her evolution has positioned her as both a bridge builder and a bold critic in today's fractured political climate. And today we have the pleasure of hearing from her firsthand here in Israel. Brianna, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here in the studio.
It's such a generous introduction. Thank you very much. I'm a huge fan of yours, Emily. I love your work.
Fan of yours as well. Oh. Very, very excited to have you here with us. Now, I just want to start by asking you, I mean, you've been vocal about changing your perspective a little bit on Israel through everything that's happened. What sparked the shift? I mean, was there a specific moment when you were like, wow, this is not what I thought it was?
Yes. So I rose to prominence in the United States. It was about 11 years ago. There was a thing called Gamergate, which was basically this scandal in the United States about how women were treated in the technology industry. I thought we were on the side of women and women's rights. And I started to understand there was something really rotten in progressivism during my congressional campaign, when, the Women's March in the United States explicitly banned Zionists from participating in it. And I remember going, that's really weird. I thought, Jewish women were women. And yet, to my credit, I took a step back and did not participate in that march. The thing that really made me understand there was a cancer we needed to deal with was on October 7th. Because I saw a really good friend of mine advocating what Hamas was doing. And I actually called her up on the phone. This is someone who I'd gone around the world, I'd been on stage at conferences with, talking about women's rights, talking about sexual violence at work. And I call her up and I'm like, do you understand, Jewish women were raped here? How can you be advocating this when this is what we've been doing publicly for the last 10 years. And before I know it, we're in a screaming match about Israel-Palestine. And I sat there to myself, and I want to admit, I had barely followed this conflict. I was vaguely Israel, but I did not really deeply follow it. So I started really reading about the history here and truly came away 99% pro-Israel. It seems like it's a much more straightforward conflict than I think people will admit.
Now, what was your initial belief or understanding about Israel from the progressive movement, from the circles that you were in? Did it change drastically, or were you just not really that involved? Were you not really aware of it ahead of time?
There's an actual tweet that, I put out a while back when, and I'm embarrassed to say it now, it's this disappearing Palestine meme that completely inverts the history and makes it seem like Israel is taken and taken and taken from, Gaza, when that's not the truth. I critiqued it, when y'all bombed a building that the AP headquarters were in, not really understanding the nuance of Hamas going into civilian locations strategically, turning them into valid military targets and basically daring Israel to respond. So I had this storyline that I just picked up like oxygen from the progressive movement. But when I started to really read into it and check it out, it just didn't.
One of the things that we hear a lot about Israel, especially from more extreme progressive groups, although also on the far right these days with how things are going, is that Israel is this colonialist entity, that Zionism is a colonialist movement and therefore something regressive, not progressive. What's your experience with this claim? And now that you've been in Israel, even if it's just a couple of days, What's your experience with that? Do you think Israel is a colonialist entity?
I think Israel is the most successful decolonialist project in history. You've reclaimed your land, you've turned it into a paradise. And I want to tell you a story about actually getting here. So, my plane lands in Munich to take the flight to Israel. And I have to walk 15 minutes through the entire Munich airport to this other side, completely secluded, no flights around, no people, nothing. Go through this additional security, and it's just Jews and woos on that side of the airport.
Jews and woos, I love it.
Jews and woos. Just so separating it out. And I was thinking about this before the trip here, talking to Jewish friends. Like, I'm afraid to have opinions. I'm afraid to show my Jewishness at work. I'm not sure where to send my kids to college. So that's where I was coming from. So I wake up the night I get here, and I put on my running shoes, and I go out for a run on the beach in Tel Aviv, and there are thousands of Jews there, happy, playing volleyball, pushing baby carriages, old couples walking together hand in hand. And I've never seen this together, like that many Jews just so happy. And I think this idea, when it's your land to begin with, that you have taken it from someone else, it seems very comical to me.
I've definitely been to that airport and done that same flight as you, and it is a bit alarming. It's its own terminal.
Yes.
It's its own area. You have your own security, and it's a little bit intimidating. On the one hand, that's a good thing because you want to make sure the flight is safe.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it's a little bit sad. Yeah. It's a little bit sad that we still have to do that. Now you're in Israel now. It's your first time here. What has most surprised you so far, and what has been, I think, the most meaningful experience for you thus far in your visit?
Well, it's hard to, I saw one of the kibbutz that was attacked on October 7th yesterday. It's really difficult to stand in rooms where women were raped and burned alive. It's hard to look upon places where brave men threw themselves on grenades to save their girlfriend, right? That, I don't mind telling you, I just wept in my hotel room last night. We saw the Nova Festival. It's horrific. And, I almost feel like maybe if you're from here, you're a little blind to it, but there's such a grief baked into being in Israel and being a Jew right now that's very apparent to me. So that was the most meaningful. I think the thing that has surprised me the most is just how open people are here. Everyone wants to tell you their story. They're interested, and I think people are just truly kind here. It's really beautiful.
I think you met with one of the survivors,
I did.
Right? A Nova survivor?
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that experience, if you can?
No, I can. It's just he was clearly still dealing with a lot. And, we sat down yesterday. They had a bench at the Nova Festival where one of the families of one of the young women killed put out a bench, and out of the hopes people would sit there and look at this picture of their daughter and reflect on her life. And I did that with the Nova Festival survivor, and he told me how the entire month after that happened, he just walked around thinking he was dead because he couldn't understand how he was spared. And he kept telling me over and over that he couldn't believe how clean the place was because the only way he could see it was with all the dead bodies there. And Emily, I gotta tell you, it is so hard for me to square that reality with what I've been seeing in the United States with the progressive movement after October 7th, which is turning the victims of terrorism into the perpetuators of terrorism. The people I've spent the last decade working with do not care about this. They will not look at this. And it's really a crisis of conscience for me.
Now, you've spoken more recently about how the Democratic Party has been hijacked by this more extremist movement, some of which you've already spoken about. I want to ask you, what has the impact been on everyday Americans, on Democrats, on moderates, on women, and of course on the Jewish community, the LGBTQ community, the minority communities that exist within this sphere where the Democratic Party is supposed to be advocating for them. It's supposed to be their home. And yet it's sort of been hijacked by this regressive, I would say, movement. What is your take on this?
So I think it's very straightforward. I have been in the United States as a frontline advocate for these issues for literally the last 11 years. I was there for Me Too, women, Black Lives Matter, LGBT rights across the board. Again and again, we've done that. Somehow when it comes to Jews, y'all don't count. And there is a cost on the left for asking people to consider their anti-Semitism. The cost is very straightforward, Emily. I fully believe that the Democratic Party is not going to be electable until we deal with this anti-Semitism. There's a cancer within our movement. And let me tell you why. You can talk to some fringe leftist that can convince himself that these Hamas terrorists are actually the good guys, but normal Americans are not stupid. I can show you polls that show that they equate that kind of fringe radical belief increasingly with our party. They think we stand for that. So, just beyond this reality that it's deeply unfair to the Jews that vote Democrat and stand with us and donate to our party and run for office, beyond that, it is going to continue losing us elections, in my view.
Well, I think one of the things that's especially pernicious about the whole inversion of the victim and the aggressor on this conflict is that this is something that's also anti-America.
Yeah.
We've seen these movements burning American flags, calling for, at Columbia, I don't remember the exact quote, eradication of Western civilization, something like this, referring to the United States. Is there any pushback from the Democratic Party? I know there's voices like yours. Are there more like you who are speaking out with alarm bells about this concerning trend?
Obviously, we have Richie Torres. He's been a real champion, just flat out saying that the fringe Free Hamas movement is the biggest gift we've ever given to the Republican Party. He's dead on about that. Most Democrats, I'm sorry to say, have not shown leadership in this moment. We need people to stand up. And it's not even that we don't need individual Democrats to solve the crisis in the Middle East. We need them to call their Jewish neighbors and say, you matter to us. And for whatever reason, we've tried to split the middle on this and not take sides. And by doing that, we've shown our Jewish friends exactly what we think of them.
Now, as someone who has become more pro-Israel, we'll say, over time, do you believe that it's possible to support and advocate for Palestinian human rights, for example, while also supporting a Jewish and democratic state of Israel?
Of course. How could you not do that?
Some people don't think so.
I personally, I understand this is an unpopular opinion. I think the quickest way to bring peace and security to the Palestinians who are the victims of Hamas is to finish the job. Take out these Hamas terrorists, put in place a system that can get them food and education without this indoctrination and support of terrorism, and move forward from there. It's very clear to me that's the way forward.
Now, I want to ask you about some of the criticism that you've faced since you've been more outspoken about the issue of Israel, especially since October 7th. Now, I myself have seen the rash of nonsense that you have received on social media, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this sort of cancel culture that you've been on the receiving end of when it comes to this conflict, especially amongst some of your progressive peers.
So it's really funny to me when people accuse Israel or Jews of paying me to have this, to support them. If I add up all the contracts I have lost since October 7th for standing with you, it's $100,000. Like, it has been a significant amount of work. I've gone and found other people to work with, but it's really hard when people choose not to work with you because you stand with Jews in Israel. I've been blacklisted from certain media organizations that, again, covered my work on women's rights, but just for whatever reason, when you're talking about Jews, that's too far. So, and just on top of that, you talk about like secondhand smoke causing cancer. I feel like I have secondhand anti-Semitism at this point because I get so much harassment, death threats, insults on a daily basis. It's truly bizarre. And you can call me every Jewish slur in the book. It doesn't affect me, but it also does at some level. It's really, you can see how they do not consider you human if you advocate for this stuff.
It really is appalling, and I think one of the interesting things about Israel is how they've sort of turned from an old school anti-Semitism to like a modern anti-Semitism under the name of Zionism. It's sort of this catch-all term for everything they don't like. And you see now, also in Israel, you see sometimes, you know, Arab Israelis or other Israeli minorities being targeted with anti-Semitism, swastikas, or calling them, you know, Nazis, these type of things, because they are Israelis. Yeah. They've been targeted simply because they're Israelis, and we saw it on October 7th as well. Israeli minorities, Arab Israelis being slaughtered, just as their Jewish compatriots here in Israel. So it's definitely a alarming trend, and I'm sorry that you've been on the receiving end of these crazy watermelon brigade, I call them, free Palestine protesters on social media. Hopefully not too much in person.
No, it's been lovely here. Well, they have shown up to my house multiple times.
Really?
So, yeah.
Really? How did you handle that?
I sent it to the FBI. They drove up to my house. They took pictures outside of my front door saying, and then they told me how they were going to kill me, and, you know, you report that stuff. So one of the things is we need to think about our immigration policy in America. We are bringing these same radical elements that want to hurt Jews into this country. And I've seen firsthand, these are people that have no problem advocating for violence. And I think I have plenty of criticisms of the Trump administration, but I think there is the first duty for any president in the nation is to keep people safe. And I think screening the people that we allow into the country for these extremist, terrorist-supporting views makes absolute sense to me. I think it is really damning of the Democrats that we have not done that.
Well, I think it's definitely a bipartisan issue. I mean, It shouldn't be something on the right or left. It's a national security issue.
That's right. So why do the Republicans own this? I don't understand it.
Yeah. I want to ask you, what do you think is the most dangerous misconception on the progressive side when it comes to Israel, when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I think it's this idea that Israel is the aggressor here. And it is, you know, we talk sometimes in women's rights politics about DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim order. And that's exactly what has happened to Israel here. You have the victims of October 7th and terrorism for many, many years, and you've turned them into the aggressors. I think it's setting up this anti-Western dynamic where Jews can't defend themselves, and even our very values of democracy themselves, this is on the back foot now.
Do you think that there's room still on the left for these more moderate, I would not even say moderate, but more logical voices when it comes to advocating what are or were the core values of the Democratic Party?
I think we need to come to, forgive the phrase, Jesus moment in the Democratic Party. We need to sit down and really think about what has happened here. Because I believe, you know, I think anti-Semitism shifts to any particular moment. And I think what has happened in this moment is anti-Semitism has shifted into the language of human rights. And it's wrapped itself in that. So it's like if you stand for women's rights, and you stand for gay rights, then you've also got to stand against this, and you have to stand against your own country. And that's where it goes too far. So I think until the Democrats can sit down and really understand the degree to which our values have been co-opted, I don't see how we get our feet underneath us again. And yeah, just one thing about that, you know, it is so important, you know, for when I think about Israel, one of the things I find so inspirational about your people and about this country is I think Israel has a lot of the answer for these toxic identity politics that I've seen destroy the movement I care about over the last decade. It seems like in America we've got this idea where every group can just come forward and can explain how it's the victim hard enough, and then all of society needs to rearrange itself to address it. And don't get me wrong, I think women face certain challenges, Black people, you know, we need to address poverty. These things are real. But what I find so inspirational about Israel is this is a society where all the odds are stacked against you and you made choices. Some of them were difficult choices, they were painful choices, but you made them. And you've built a paradise anyone can walk outside in Tel Aviv and see for themselves. So I think it's time for Democrats to get back in touch with that spirit. Like, yes, there's some people that have been handed a hard hand, but our destiny is up to us and no one else, and let's go build that future together.
That's a really great way of putting it. I wanted to ask you, one of the things that we've seen that I think has been particularly inverted since October 7th is the LGBT movement that's sort of been co-opted by this Free Palestine crowd, despite the fact that there is some of the most homophobic, intolerant views in the world under the Palestinian Authority. And we're not even talking about under Hamas in Gaza, which of course executes gay people. In Israel, in contrast, you have a thriving gay community. You have the largest gay pride parade in the Middle East, really the only one in the Middle East. If you exclude Turkey with Istanbul, they have a little something going on there. What is your response to some of this hijacking of that particular movement in the U.S. that we've seen?
Well, you know, I don't mind admitting I'm a trans woman. I was deeply inspired by Dana International in 1998. I thought
I'm not a trans woman, and I was too, so.
Well, she was amazing. She's amazing. I hope I get to meet her while I'm here. But I was going to say, like, you know, it's very strange to me. I can point to you to about 3 other trans women on the left that support Israel. It seems to me our entire movement has just gone along with this ideology of the people that want to kill us. And it's truly very terrifying to me. You know, one of the reasons perhaps this isn't fair, but this is my experience and I want to share it, that, you know, after October 7th, when I started really thinking about these politics, I asked myself what my life would have been like if Jews had not been there for me. And let me tell you some of the things that would not have happened. The therapist that helped me transition 20 years ago to be the first student at Ole Miss to ever transition would not have been there, and I probably would have died. The school administrator that went to bat for me and helped me get access so I could continue classes, she was Jewish. She actually pulled me into her office and explained to me the lipstick I was wearing did not work for me, like a Jewish mother. Like the surgeon that helped give me the health care that made my life possible. He didn't just help me, he's trained half the surgeons in the country on this, Dr. Jeffrey Spiegel. So it's like, you know, when it comes to the debt that I think the trans community owes Jewish people, it is non-trivial. I really urge you to go look at the history here. The fact that we can just ignore all of that and go in for this brainwashing, it was a moral mistake of historic proportions. And I don't know how to change that, but I can say I am personally sorry and I apologize.
Well, I think you're doing plenty now. You're very outspoken and really putting yourself out there, sometimes at great risk to yourself. We'll wrap this up, but I do want to ask you before we close, what is your advice to young progressives, to young activists in the LGBTQ movement, in the women's rights movement?
I think that, you know, we have a duty to speak up. I really do. And I think that it's a lot easier for us to be silent and go along and not have these conflicts. There's a pattern I've seen in the Democratic Party over and over again. We love our polling data, and we will sit down and look at these sheets of paper, and we'll find the right words to use, and we'll sit in a team meeting, and we'll say, if we just use this phrase and we match it over here, then we can say something that'll make this side happy and this side happy. Not choosing sides is not working here. We just got annihilated in the last election. Yeah, I urge people to look at the internal polling for the Democratic Party. Jews are abandoning us. They feel homeless right now. You know, if Trump had not been on the ballot, a lot fewer of them would have voted for us in this last election. So I think we have a choice. We can show bravery and we can stand with the people that share our values, or we can continue on this course doing nothing and we can lose the Democratic Party. And I truly think the stakes are that high.
I think also that even for someone on the right, it's important to have this dialogue, to be able to speak to people who are different than you, to have multiple parties represented. It's not healthy for a society to be so one-sided. So there's a reason even for people on the right, I think, to support what you're saying, because this robust pro-America dialogue is something I think that helps both sides.
What
when it
I've
comes to
found,
this issue?
you know, I know your country has some political divisions as well, but you know, America is extremely divided right now. One of the things I find so fascinating that if I speak to a Republican and they are someone who is on board with the right of Israel to exist from a national security perspective, I've never talked to them and not been able to find like a place to start a conversation where we could talk about tax policy, national security, women's rights, infrastructure investment. It is so helpful as I do my job as someone who works in politics to have that place to start. So I think Israel is important for many reasons, but I think it's also a place that the right and the left can start to talk to each other.
All right, well, we do have to conclude, but I do want to thank you for, first of all, for being an ally, for coming to Israel, for seeing things for yourself, for being willing to change your views and to accept new information, and to continue learning on this journey. And I hope that you have a wonderful trip here in Israel. We're very, very lucky to have you here and lucky to have you as an ally, and appreciate all of the work that you're doing. Brianna Wu, thank you.
It's my pleasure.